A poignant tale of new beginnings, where fate intertwines love amidst desolation and despair. Fleeing a humiliating past and heavily pregnant, Laura seeks refuge in the mountains of North Carolina, unaware that a raging storm will lead her into the arms of Vincent, a millionaire scarred by tragedy. On one fateful night, their worlds collide, merging the fragility of new life with the melancholy of a wounded heart. Prepare for an unforgettable journey where love rekindles in the silence of solitude and hope blossoms amidst adversity. The rain hammered against the windshield of the old sedan, and Laura Morrison gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Her hands trembled, not just from the chill seeping through the poorly sealed windows, but from the weight of the decision she'd made 3 days prior. At 25, she'd never imagined fleeing New York City with only a few changes of clothes, her art supplies, and $500 in her purse. The baby stirred in her belly, as if to remind her of its presence. Laura rested a free hand on her 7-month rounded stomach and whispered a silent apology. This wasn't how she'd dreamed of experiencing her first pregnancy. This wasn't how she'd envisioned raising a daughter, alone, broke, without support. "You can't raise that child by yourself, Laura." Her mother's cold voice still echoed in her ears. "Go back to Robert. He said he can arrange things, that he can take care of you both discreetly." Discreetly. The word made her stomach clench. Robert Sterling had made his position clear. She would be kept as a comfortable mistress, their daughter financially supported, but he would never leave his wife. His political career and his reputation mattered more than any feeling he might have harbored for Laura. The GPS indicated she was nearing her destination, a small cabin she'd rented for a month through an online listing. It would be a time to think, to decide what to do. Maybe she could sell some paintings to tourists, perhaps even open a small studio in the area. The mountains of North Carolina had always inspired her. Meanwhile, 60 miles away, Vincent Allister stood by his office window, watching the same storm lash the region. At 38, he'd built a sprawling vineyard estate that stretched across hundreds of acres of the most beautiful land. But all that wealth felt as empty as the wine left in the glasses after his solitary dinners. The rain always reminded him of Isabella. It was on a night just like this, 5 years ago, that she'd left for a charity meeting and never returned. The accident on the winding road that cut through the estate had taken not only his wife, but all the dreams he'd built of a family, of children running through the mansion's halls. "Mr. Allister?" Mrs. Evans, the housekeeper, interrupted his dark thoughts. "Dinner is served." He nodded without turning. Mrs. Evans was one of the few people who remained on the estate. Most of the staff had been let go over the years, not for financial reasons, but because Vincent couldn't bear the commotion, the voices, the life pulsing around him when his own seemed to have stopped in time. The storm intensified, and Vincent closed his eyes. On nights like these, he usually drank more than usual, letting the wine dull the pain that never diminished. Friends had given up visiting him. His businesses ran on autopilot thanks to competent administrators, and he was content with the voluntary isolation he'd chosen. Laura finally spotted the small cabin in the middle of the woods. It was more rustic than the photos suggested, but it would suffice. She parked under a tree that offered little protection from the rain and ran to the porch, carrying only a small suitcase. The key was where the owner had promised, beneath a pot of dried plants. The cabin smelled of damp and disuse, but it was clean and had the basics: a simple kitchen, a small bedroom, and a living room with a fireplace. Laura smiled for the first time in days. Here, no one would judge her. Here, she could think clearly. As she unpacked her things, a sudden contraction made her double over in pain. It was too soon. She still had 2 months to go. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. It must just be the stress of the journey, the change of environment. But when a second contraction hit, stronger than the first, Laura felt panic seize her chest. She was alone, in the middle of the woods, far from any hospital. Her cell phone barely had a signal. The rain continued its relentless assault outside, and Vincent had given up on dinner. He was pacing the mansion's empty halls when he heard a strange sound coming from the direction of the road. It sounded like a car, but who would be crazy enough to drive on these mountain roads on a night like this? He approached the window of the main entrance and saw a small figure running towards his front door. Vincent frowned. No one knew the way to his house, and he wasn't expecting visitors. When the doorbell rang, he hesitated. It had been months since he'd had company, but something about the urgency of the knocking made him act. When he opened it, he found a young woman drenched, her hair plastered to her face, and an expression of absolute desperation. "Please," she gasped, clutching her rounded belly. "I need help. I think the baby is coming." Vincent stood paralyzed for a moment, gazing at the stranger fate had delivered to his doorstep on a storm-ridden night. The last thing he expected was to contend with life bursting into his world of silence and death. But when Laura stumbled and he instinctively caught her, feeling the delicate weight of her vulnerability and the warmth of another human being after so long in solitude, Vincent knew that this night would change everything. Vincent carried Laura into the mansion, feeling the delicate weight of her body tremble against his. The scent of rain and fear emanated from her, mingling with the aroma of wood and wine that had permeated his home for years. He laid her down on the main living room sofa, unsure exactly what to do with the situation that had invaded his sanctuary. "Mrs. Evans!" he called out, his voice echoing through the empty corridors. The housekeeper appeared quickly, her eyes wide at the sight of the wet young woman clearly in labor. "Good heavens," the older woman murmured, rushing to fetch towels. "How long between contractions, dear?" Laura tried to answer, but another wave of pain made her groan. Vincent watched everything as if he were a spectator in his own life, unable to process how that silent night had transformed into something so intense and vital. "We need to get her to a hospital," he said, already grabbing his car keys. "In this storm, the roads are impassable," Mrs. Evans replied, placing a warm towel over Laura's shoulders. "And by the looks of it, there won't be time." Vincent felt panic rise in his throat. He wasn't prepared for this. He didn't want this responsibility. For 5 years, he had fled everything that represented life, growth, the future. And now fate had placed a woman about to give birth right in the center of his carefully constructed world of solitude. "I can't," he began, but stopped when Laura gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered, her green eyes shining with tears and determination. "I have no one else." Something in those words touched an old wound in Vincent. He too had no one. He too had chosen solitude as his companion. But looking at the young woman, seeing life struggling to be born, he felt a pang of something he had buried deep within. The instinct to protect. The next few hours passed in a blur. Vincent found himself helping Mrs. Evans, fetching warm water, holding Laura's hand as the contractions intensified. He learned that her name was Laura Morrison, that she was an artist, that she was fleeing a situation she didn't fully explain. "The baby's father?" Vincent asked during a moment of calm, unable to contain his curiosity. Laura closed her eyes. "There is no father, at least not one who matters." His response carried an bitterness that she couldn't decipher. Vincent had distanced himself physically from her after that, as if the words had built an invisible barrier between them. When the baby finally arrived, crying loudly and healthily, Vincent felt something break inside his chest. She was a small, perfect girl with clenched fists and a powerful cry. Laura wept as she held her, a mixture of relief, love, and terror on her face. "She's beautiful," Vincent murmured, unable to tear his gaze from the child. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like if that scene were his, if Isabella were there, if his child were being born in that room that had become an improvised delivery space. "Thank you," Laura said, looking at him with a gratitude that made him uncomfortable. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved our lives." Vincent pulled away abruptly. Mrs. Evans did most of the work. I just was here. But Laura had sensed the kindness beneath the brusqueness, the way he held the baby with extreme care when Mrs. Evans needed to step out for more supplies. There was a profound sadness in those dark eyes, a pain she recognized because she carried a similar one. The next morning, the storm had passed, but Vincent found that he couldn't simply send Laura away. She had nowhere to go, was out of money, and had a newborn. Mrs. Evans had prepared the guest room and insisted they stay until Laura recovered. It's temporary, Vincent told himself, watching Laura breastfeed her daughter on the morning porch. The morning sun of the mountains illuminated her brown hair, and she hummed softly a song he didn't know. There was something mesmerizing about that scene of motherhood, something that made his house feel alive again. But Vincent fought against that feeling. He had carefully built his defenses, had learned that to love meant to lose, that attachment led to unbearable pain. Laura represented everything he had rejected: hope, future, the possibility of starting over. "You can't stay here indefinitely," he said one afternoon, finding her painting in the garden while the baby slept in an improvised bassinet. Laura stopped painting and looked at him. "I know. I just need a few days to get organized, to decide what to do." "And what do you intend to do?" The question came out harsher than he intended. "I don't know," she admitted, raw honesty in her voice. "I left everything behind. My family, my life. I thought I could start over here, but now, with her..." Laura looked at her sleeping daughter. "Maybe I was too naive." Vincent felt a pang of something that could be compassion, but also irritation. Her vulnerability bothered him because it awakened instincts he preferred to keep dormant. "There's an empty cottage on the property," he heard himself say, surprised by his own words. "The old caretaker's cottage. It needs some repairs, but it's habitable. You can stay there in exchange for work. Mrs. Evans needs help with the main house." Laura stared at him, surprised. "You do that? Why?" Vincent looked away, unable to answer, not truly knowing why. Perhaps it was the way she sang to her daughter, or how her eyes lit up when she painted, or simply because it had been a long time since he'd felt needed by anyone. "It's a business proposition," he said coldly. "Nothing more." But that night, when Vincent saw her from his office window, walking in the garden with the baby in her arms, he knew he was mistaken. There was something about that woman and her daughter that was cracking the walls he had built around his heart. And when Laura looked toward his window and waved timidly, Vincent felt for the first time in 5 years that perhaps, just perhaps, isolation was no longer enough to protect him from the pain of living. 2 weeks had passed since Laura had moved into the old caretaker's cottage. The stone structure was situated a respectful distance from the main mansion, nestled among vineyards that stretched as far as the eye could see. She had spent the first few days cleaning and organizing the space, transforming it into a welcoming home for herself and little Helena, the name she had chosen in honor of the grandmother who had raised her. Vincent observed the transformations from a distance: colorful curtains in the windows, a clothesline with baby clothes fluttering in the wind, the distant sound of lullabies that reached him on the quietest nights. The property, which for so long had been a mausoleum of memories, was beginning to awaken. The work routine established itself naturally. Laura helped Mrs. Evans with the cleaning and organizing of the main house, always with Helena sleeping in a portable bassinet that Vincent had arranged to buy in town. He tried to maintain his distance, but found it impossible to completely ignore their presence. "She has a green thumb," Mrs. Evans commented one morning while preparing Vincent's coffee. "Just look at what she did with those potted plants on the porch." Vincent looked out the window and saw Laura watering the plants that had withered under his negligent care. She talked to them as she worked, as if they were old friends. Helena slept peacefully in a baby seat nearby, protected from the sun by a makeshift sunshade. "She paints too," Mrs. Evans continued, a discreet smile on her lips. I saw some of her canvases when I took over the clean towels. She has a lot of talent. Vincent grunted a non-committal response, but his curiosity had been piqued. That afternoon, when Laura went for a walk with Helena, he found himself walking to the caretaker's cottage. The door was ajar, and he could see some canvases propped against the wall. They were landscapes of the mountains, but painted with a sensitivity that surprised him. She had captured not only the visual beauty of the land, but something deeper, the melancholy that hung over those mountains, the majestic solitude of the vineyards, the sadness he thought was exclusively his. "You like them?" Laura's voice behind him made him turn abruptly. "I shouldn't be in here," he said, clearly uncomfortable at having been caught snooping. "It's fine." Laura entered, placing Helena in her bassinet and approaching the canvases. "I was actually hoping for your opinion. They're of your property, after all." Vincent studied the paintings more closely. There was one in particular that intrigued him. It showed the main mansion at dusk, but there was a solitary figure in the office window. He recognized the silhouette immediately. "You watch me," he observed, without accusation in his voice, just an unsettling curiosity. Laura blushed slightly. "I'm sorry, it's just, you have a very striking presence." "It's hard not to notice." "Striking presence." Vincent repeated the words as if they were foreign. "My wife used to say I was transparent, that she could read me like an open book." It was the first time he had mentioned Isabella to Laura, and the words came out before he could stop them. Laura sensed the importance of the moment and remained silent, waiting. "She died here," Vincent continued, looking out the window towards the dangerous curve in the road. "Car accident. A stormy night, much like the one you arrived on." "I'm so sorry," Laura said softly. "That must have been terrible." "What's terrible is that I couldn't save her." The words came out laden with the guilt he had carried for 5 years. "She left angry with me that night. We had a silly argument about having children. She wanted them. I thought it wasn't the right time yet. If I hadn't been so stubborn, she wouldn't have left the house." Laura moved closer to him, Helena beginning to stir in the bassinet. "Accidents happen, Vincent. It wasn't your fault." "It wasn't?" He looked at her with an intensity that made her take a step back. "I had everything. A woman who loved me, a life ahead of me, the possibility of being a father. And I threw it all away out of pride." Helena began to cry, and Laura instinctively picked her up. Vincent watched the scene, mother and daughter, the naturalness of their bond, the unconditional love that radiated from them. Something contracted in his chest. "That's why you live alone," Laura realized. "You're punishing yourself." "I deserve the solitude," he replied simply. In the days that followed, a strange pattern established itself between them. Vincent began showing up at the caretaker's cottage with flimsy excuses. He needed to check a pipe or make sure the windows closed properly. Laura received these visits with a patience that disconcerted him, offering coffee and continuing her activities as if his presence were natural. One afternoon, while Laura painted in the garden, Helena sleeping beside her, Vincent approached to observe her work. It was a portrait of her daughter, but there was something in the baby's expression that intrigued him. "She looks too serious for a child," he commented. Laura paused her brushstroke. "She has her father's eyes, always had that thoughtful expression." "You don't talk much about him." Laura was silent for a long moment, as if weighing how much she should reveal. "There's not much to say. He's married, he's a politician, and he made it clear that Helena and I would just be a convenient arrangement in his life." "An arrangement?" Vincent repeated the words with contempt. "My family thought I should accept it. After all, he offered financial security, an education for Helena. What more could a single mother want?" The bitterness in Laura's voice was palpable. "They didn't understand that I preferred uncertainty to the humiliation of being kept a secret." Vincent studied her profile as she continued painting. There was strength in that decision, a dignity he recognized and respected. "That was brave," he finally said. "It was desperate." Laura corrected. Bravery would have been saying no from the start. That night, Vincent found himself on his office porch, watching the light on in the caretaker's cottage. He could see Laura's silhouette moving through the kitchen, probably preparing Helena's night bottle. There was something comforting in that domestic scene, a normalcy he had forgotten existed. For the first time in 5 years, Vincent wondered if the penance he had imposed on himself was truly necessary, or if it was just cowardice disguised as noble suffering. Laura had risked everything for dignity and maternal love. What had he risked for anything in the last few years? When she appeared in the window, cradling Helena, and waved in his direction, Vincent didn't hide as he usually did. He waved back, and for a brief but significant moment, they connected across the distance and the darkness, two wounded hearts recognizing each other's pain. Helena had been running a high fever for 2 days. Laura had tried every home remedy she knew, but the baby's temperature only climbed. In the early hours of Tuesday, when the thermometer read almost 104 degrees Fahrenheit, panic finally overcame Laura's pride. She ran barefoot across the dew-wet grass, Helena burning in her arms, pounding desperately on the mansion door. Vincent opened it, still in his bathrobe, hair disheveled, but one look at the child's condition was enough to spur him into action. "We need to go to the hospital. Now," he said, already grabbing his car keys. The 40-minute drive to the nearest town passed in a blur of treacherous turns and whispered pleas. Vincent drove with a skill that showed intimate knowledge of those winding roads, while Laura held Helena in the back seat, trying to keep her awake. "She's going to be okay," Vincent said, looking in the rearview mirror whenever he could. "Helena is strong, just like her mother." At the hospital, Vincent transformed. The reclusive and hesitant man vanished, replaced by someone accustomed to being obeyed. He demanded the best pediatrician, a private room, all necessary tests. When the doctor mentioned that hospitalization would be required and that the costs would be high, Vincent simply handed over his credit card without hesitation. "I can't accept this," Laura protested, as Helena received IV fluids in a private room. "I already owe you too much." "You owe me nothing," Vincent replied, pulling up a chair to sit beside the hospital bed, "and I won't hear another word about it." For the first 24 hours, they took turns by Helena's side. Laura would drift off for a few minutes in the chair next to the bed, only to wake with Vincent covering her with a blanket or bringing hot coffee. He had cleared his schedule and seemed determined not to leave until the crisis passed. It was on the second night, when Helena had finally improved and was sleeping peacefully, that everything changed. Laura had dozed off, exhausted from days of vigil, when she woke to Vincent whispering Isabella's name. He was asleep in the chair beside her, but his face was contorted in pain. "No, please, I promise. We'll have the baby. Come home with me," he murmured, clearly trapped in a nightmare. Laura gently touched his shoulder to wake him. Vincent's eyes snapped open, disoriented, and for a moment he seemed not to recognize where he was. When his eyes met hers, Laura saw a raw vulnerability he had never allowed her to witness. "Sorry," he said, running his hands over his face. You were dreaming about her." Vincent nodded, not attempting to deny it. "I dream about her every night, always the same thing. She's asking me to come back and I can't save her." Laura looked at Helena, who slept peacefully, then back at Vincent. "You saved me. You saved both of us more than once. That doesn't erase what I couldn't do for Isabella." "No," Laura agreed softly, "but maybe it means you deserve a second chance at happiness." Something shifted in the air between them at that moment. Vincent looked at her as if truly seeing her for the first time, and Laura felt her heart quicken under his intense gaze. When he leaned closer to check on Helena, his face passed too close to hers, and Laura felt the warmth of his breath. "Laura," he began, and there was something dangerous in the way he spoke her name. She should have pulled away. She should have remembered he was her employer, that she depended on his generosity, that intense emotions in crisis situations rarely led to sensible decisions. But when Vincent lowered his head and his lips found hers, Laura didn't resist. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant as if both were testing unknown waters. But when Laura responded, placing her hand on the back of his neck, Vincent pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened, laden with all the repressed desire and emotional need that had been building between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Vincent rested his forehead against hers, and Laura could feel the internal conflict that consumed him. "This can't happen," he whispered, but didn't pull away. "Why?" she asked, knowing the answer would be complicated. "Because I can't offer what you deserve. Because I'm a broken man who lives haunted by the past. Because you and Helena deserve someone whole. And what if I don't care about that?" Vincent closed his eyes, as if her words were a temptation he struggled to resist. "You should care." The next morning, Helena was well enough to be discharged. On the drive back to the estate, they maintained polite conversation about the care she would need in the coming days. But the tension in the air was palpable. The kiss had changed everything between them, and both knew there was no turning back. Vincent helped her settle Helena back into the caretaker's cottage, but his demeanor was different, more attentive, more protective, but also more distant, as if battling something within. "Thank you," Laura said as he prepared to leave. "For everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "I don't want your money," he interrupted, turning to face her. His gaze was intense, laden with meaning. "But there's something I need you to understand." Laura waited, her heart pounding. "What happened at the hospital? It can't happen again. Not because you don't deserve it, but because I can't give you what you need. I can't be the man you and Helena deserve." But even as he spoke those words, Vincent couldn't tear his eyes from her lips, and Laura realized that, regardless of what he said, something fundamental had shifted between them. The kiss had opened a door that neither of them could completely close. That night, when Laura saw him in his office window as usual, she waved. But this time, instead of just returning the gesture, Vincent came downstairs and walked to the gate that separated the mansion's garden from the caretaker's cottage. They stood there, each on one side of the fence, looking at each other in the moonlight. Neither said a word, but both knew they were standing on the precipice of something that could either destroy the fragile balance they had built or transform their lives forever. The days following the hospital incident brought a dangerous intimacy between Vincent and Laura. He had started appearing at the caretaker's cottage every evening after dinner, always with some excuse, checking if Helena was well, bringing medicine, discussing minor repairs. But both knew the real reasons were otherwise. Laura would wait for him with hot coffee and conversations that stretched into the late hours. Vincent discovered that she had studied art history before fully dedicating herself to painting, and their discussions about culture and art rekindled a part of his mind that had been dormant. She, in turn, was fascinated by the stories he told about his family's winemaking tradition, about the secrets passed down from generation to generation. A week after Helena's discharge, Vincent arrived at the caretaker's cottage earlier than usual, finding Laura in the garden. She had created a small, improvised outdoor studio, taking advantage of the evening light to paint. Helena slept peacefully in her stroller, protected by delicate netting. "You're painting the mansion again," Vincent observed, approaching the canvas. "It's different this time," Laura said without stopping her painting. "Before I painted the solitude, now what?" Laura paused, looking at him with an intensity that made him step closer. "Now, I paint the possibility." Vincent stood behind her, so close he could feel the soft scent of her hair. When Laura leaned in for more paint, her back brushed lightly against his chest, and both froze. "Laura," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She turned slowly, standing between Vincent and the easel. The space between them was minimal, charged with a tension that had been building for weeks. When Vincent raised his hand to touch her face, Laura closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the caress. "I tried to keep my distance," he confessed, "but you're like a magnet. The harder I fight, the stronger the pull." "Then stop fighting. Laura murmured, placing her hand over his. This time, when Vincent kissed her, there was no hesitation. It was a kiss laden with weeks of repressed desire, of shared solitude, of a connection neither could deny any longer. Laura let herself be enveloped in his arms, feeling for the first time in months that she was where she was meant to be. They were interrupted by the sound of a car coming up the estate driveway. Vincent pulled away abruptly, recognizing the engine. "It's my brother," he said, running his hands through his hair. "He can't see us like this." Laura quickly straightened her clothes, picking up Helena. "Why? What's the problem?" "Edward is complicated. Ever since Isabella died, he's been trying to convince me to sell the estate, to move to the city. If he finds out about you, about us." The car stopped in front of the main mansion, and Laura could see an elegant, middle-aged man stepping out of the vehicle. Even from a distance, the resemblance to Vincent was noticeable. But there was something different in his posture, more calculating, less warm. "Go inside," Vincent urged, "and please, if he comes here, don't mention this between us." Laura nodded, but an uncomfortable feeling settled in her stomach. Why did their relationship need to be hidden? What exactly was Vincent afraid of? Edward Alistair didn't take long to appear at the caretaker's cottage. He knocked on the door with the confidence of someone accustomed to being welcomed wherever he went, and Laura answered with Helena in her arms, trying to appear merely the staff member she supposedly was. "You must be the new hire," Edward said, studying her with calculating eyes. "Edward Alistair, Vincent's brother." "Laura Morrison," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. Edward walked in uninvited, observing the house with excessive curiosity. "My brother didn't mention he'd hired someone with a baby. That's unusual." "Mrs. Evans needed help," Laura said, repeating the official story. Edward picked up one of the paintings propped against the wall. "You did this? You have talent. And this baby, how old?" 2 months. Laura replied, uncomfortable with the interrogation. "And the father?" The question was posed casually, but Laura perceived the trap. "That's not relevant to the work I do here." Edward smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Of course not. Well, it was a pleasure meeting you, Laura. I'm sure we'll talk more soon." After he left, Laura felt uneasy. There was something in the way Edward had observed her, as if he were cataloguing information for later use. When Vincent appeared an hour later, she shared her concerns. "Edward has always been protective," Vincent said, but there was tension in his voice. "He's worried about me ever since Isabella died." "Protective or controlling?" Laura asked. Vincent didn't answer immediately, confirming her fears. In the following days, Edward remained on the property as a guest. Laura noticed that he always appeared at moments when she and Vincent were together, always with some excuse to interrupt. He also asked constant questions about Laura's past, about Helena, about her future plans. A week later, Laura discovered the true reason for Edward's presence. She was returning from a walk with Helena when she heard raised voices coming from the main mansion. She approached the open office window and overheard a heated argument between the brothers. "You've completely lost your mind," Edward shouted. "First, you isolate yourself here for 5 years, and now you're getting involved with a stranger who showed up out of nowhere with a bastard child." "Watch what you say," Vincent replied, his voice dangerously low. "Don't I know what I'm saying?" "I looked into her, Vincent. Laura Morrison fled New York City pregnant. The child's father is a married politician. She's a gold digger." Laura felt her blood run cold. Edward had investigated her past. "You don't know what you're talking about," Vincent said. "I don't. She shows up here at your door on a stormy night pregnant and broke. How much more cliché can it get? And you, poor thing, all needy and guilt-ridden over Isabella's death, fell for it like a fool." "Enough," Vincent roared. "No, not enough. Have you forgotten there's a will? That our family has rules about marriage and inheritance? If you marry this woman, especially as a single mother and a fugitive, the family board can question your mental capacity, and I'll have legal grounds to take control of the company." Laura retreated from the window, her heart pounding. Now she understood why Vincent had insisted on keeping their relationship a secret. It wasn't just about him being ready or not. There were financial and family implications she hadn't even imagined. "Are you threatening me?" Vincent asked. "I'm protecting you," Edward replied, his voice softer now. "Send her away, Vincent, before this goes too far, before she destroys everything our father built." That night, when Vincent came to the caretaker's cottage, Laura was different, distant, formal, like in the early days. "Has something happened?" he asked, noticing the change. Laura looked at Helena, sleeping peacefully, then at Vincent. "Your brother investigated me." Vincent closed his eyes. "Laura, he knows about Robert. And more importantly, he knows why I fled. Us. That doesn't matter. Doesn't matter." Laura stood up, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "He can use this to take your company, Vincent. Your inheritance, everything." Vincent approached her, trying to touch her, but Laura stepped back. "You should have told me about the will, about your family's rules. I never would have let things get to this point if I'd known. And that's why I didn't tell you," Vincent admitted, "because I knew you'd pull away." "And I should pull away," Laura said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I can't be the reason you lose everything." But even as she said this, both knew it was too late. What was between them was too real, too strong to be simply ignored. And Edward Alastair had made it clear that he would not allow the relationship to continue without serious consequences. The explosion came 3 days later, when Laura least expected it. She was in the main mansion's garden, helping Mrs. Evans gather herbs for lunch, when she heard the sound of several cars coming up the driveway. Helena slept in her portable bassinet beneath the shade of a large oak tree, oblivious to the tension that was beginning to build in the air. "Who could that be?" Mrs. Evans murmured, shielding her eyes from the sun to get a better look. Laura immediately recognized the first car, Robert Sterling's sleek black sedan. Her blood ran cold. Behind it came 2 other vehicles, one of them with a camera crew she could identify by the visible equipment. "Oh my God," she whispered, quickly scooping Helena into her arms. "Mrs. Evans, I need to get out of here, now." But it was too late. Robert had stepped out of the car and was walking towards them with the arrogance she knew so well. Beside him was a man she didn't recognize, but who carried a leather briefcase and had the typical posture of an attorney. "Laura, my love," Robert said, opening his arms as if expecting a warm embrace. "I finally found you." The camera crew positioned themselves strategically, capturing every angle of the scene. Laura realized it wasn't a coincidence. It was a carefully orchestrated trap. "What are you doing here?" she asked, instinctively recoiling. "I've come for my family," Robert declared, loud enough for the cameras to catch every word. "I've come for my daughter and the woman I love." Laura looked around desperately. Vincent should have been in his office, but there was no sign of him. Edward, however, watched the entire scene from the mansion's balcony with a satisfied smile that confirmed her worst suspicions. "Helena isn't your daughter on paper," Laura said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You made sure of that yourself." "But I am the biological father," Robert retorted, nodding to the attorney. "And Mr. Thompson here has all the necessary documents to prove it, including a petition for joint custody." The attorney stepped forward, extending a stack of papers. "Ms. Morrison, my client is offering a very generous settlement, a house in New York City, lifelong financial support for you and the child, plus legal recognition of paternity. All he asks in return is that you return and maintain discretion about your relationship." "Discretion," Laura repeated, the word bitter on her tongue, as always. "Laura, be rational," Robert said, stepping closer. "Look around. You're living in a caretaker's cottage, depending on the charity of strangers. What future can you offer our daughter here?" It was at that moment that Vincent appeared, coming from his office with an expression of fury Laura had never seen before. Edward must have alerted him to the visitor's arrival. "What is going on here?" Vincent asked, placing himself protectively in front of Laura. Robert studied Vincent with the eyes of someone accustomed to evaluating political adversaries. "You must be the owner." Robert Sterling, State Representative. I've come to retrieve my partner and my daughter. Laura is not your partner, Vincent said, his voice icy, and she's not going anywhere against her will. Oh, but she does want to go, Edward interjected, coming down from the balcony with an envelope in his hands. Don't you, Laura? Edward approached the group, handing the envelope to Robert. Photocopies of some very interesting paintings Ms. Morrison made, including some intimate ones of my brother. Laura felt her world collapse. Edward had rifled through her belongings, found the sketches she had made of Vincent in unguarded moments, sleeping in the hospital chair, working shirtless in the garden, gazing out the window in his moments of melancholy. Very touching, Robert said, flipping through the images. Laura always had a talent for capturing intimacy. The camera zoomed in to film the paintings, and Laura realized the extent of the trap. Robert hadn't appeared there out of love or paternal responsibility. He was covering up a potential political scandal, ensuring his family man image was preserved, and Edward had provided him with the perfect ammunition. Enough! Vincent shouted, trying to snatch the papers from Robert. You have no right to... Actually, we have every right, the attorney interrupted. These images prove that my client was involved in an inappropriate relationship while caring for a minor child. This can be used in a custody battle if necessary. Laura looked at Vincent and saw the exact moment he understood the full scope of the problem. If she stayed, not only would she lose Helena, but Vincent would be dragged into a public scandal that could destroy his reputation and give Edward the ammunition he needed to challenge his mental competency. Laura, Vincent said, reaching out a hand to her, don't listen to them, we can fight this. But Laura had already made her decision. With Helena clutched to her chest, she turned to Robert. If I go with you, will you leave Vincent alone? Never bother him again. Never use those images. Laura, no, Vincent pleaded. Of course, Robert said, smiling victoriously. I just want my family back. Your family? Laura laughed bitterly. You don't even know your daughter's name. It's Helena, in case you were curious. Robert had the decency to look chagrined for a moment, but quickly composed himself. I have a lot to learn about being a father. You can teach me. Laura kissed Helena's forehead, then looked at Vincent one last time. There were tears in his eyes, a pain she recognized because she felt the same. I'm so sorry, she whispered, for everything. Laura, please, Vincent said, taking a step toward her. Don't do this. I love you. The words hung in the air like a confession that came too late. Laura closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel their impact for a moment before turning to Robert. Let's go, she said, now. As she headed for the car, Laura heard Vincent calling her name, but she didn't turn. She couldn't turn because she knew if she saw his face again, she wouldn't have the strength to leave. Edward watched the entire scene with barely disguised satisfaction. When Robert's car disappeared around the bend in the road, he approached Vincent, who stood like a statue, staring at the spot where Laura had vanished. It was for the best, Edward said, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. Now you can go back to having a normal life. Vincent shrugged off the touch abruptly. Normal? He repeated, his voice laced with contained fury. You destroyed the only good thing that's happened in my life in 5 years, and you call that normal? I saved you from a greater tragedy, Edward retorted. That woman was going to ruin everything we have. Vincent looked at his brother with an expression Edward had never seen before, pure, absolute contempt. Get off my property, Vincent said, his voice dangerously low. Now. Vincent, be rational. Get out! The shout echoed through the mountains, startling birds from the trees. Edward recoiled, finally realizing he'd gone too far. When Vincent was finally alone, he walked to the caretaker's cottage. The door was ajar, and inside were signs of Laura's hurried departure. Open drawers, a few forgotten clothes, the easel still set up with a half-finished painting. It was a portrait of him smiling, something she had painted from memory because Vincent couldn't remember genuinely smiling in years. But in Laura's delicate strokes, he saw the man he had become by her and Helena's side, a man capable of loving again, of being happy, of having hope. Now, looking at the empty cottage, Vincent realized he had lost more than the woman he loved. He had lost the version of himself Laura had helped him rekindle, and for the second time in his life, he was completely alone, with only his choices and regrets as company. 2 weeks had passed since Laura had returned to New York City with Robert, and life in the luxurious penthouse in an upscale Manhattan neighborhood seemed like a gilded dream that had quickly turned into a nightmare. Robert had fulfilled his material promises: an elegant apartment, a nanny for Helena, expensive clothes, everything money could buy. But Laura discovered that being a discreet partner meant living like a gilded prisoner. She couldn't go out alone without reporting where she was going and with whom. Her social media accounts had been gently deactivated by Robert's PR team. When she tried to sell some paintings at a local gallery, she received a polite but firm call explaining that it would be better for everyone if she focused solely on motherhood for now. "It's temporary," Robert would always say whenever she protested. "Until things calm down in the press. You understand?" But Laura was starting to understand too much, like the fact that Robert had security cameras in every room except Helena's bedroom, how he knew exactly whom she had spoken to during the day, even when she only went out to take Helena to the pediatrician, how her freedom had been exchanged for a golden cage. What haunted her most, however, were the nights. Robert expected her to play the role of partner in every aspect, but Laura felt dead inside. When he touched her, she would close her eyes and think of Vincent, of his gentle hands holding Helena, the way his eyes lit up when she entered the room, the way he whispered her name as if it were a prayer. It was on one of those nights, while breastfeeding Helena at 3 in the morning, that Laura made a decision. She picked up the new cell phone Robert had given her, surely monitored, and called the only number she had memorized, Mrs. Evans. "Hello?" The familiar voice answered after many rings. "Mrs. Evans, it's me, Laura," she whispered, looking at the door to make sure Robert was sleeping. "My dear, how are you and little Helena?" We're fine," Laura lied. "How is Vincent?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "He's not well, dear. Not well at all. He barely leaves his office, doesn't eat right, fired all the staff except me. It's like he's gone back to those first years after Isabella died. Only worse." Laura closed her eyes, feeling guilt clench her chest. "And Edward? That scoundrel!" Mrs. Evans's voice was laced with anger. "He vanished into thin air after Vincent threw him out. But yesterday he showed up here with some men in suits saying he had the right to inspect the property." "Inspect?" "He said he was concerned about Vincent's mental competency, that a man who fires staff and isolates himself like that might not be fit to manage the family businesses." Laura felt her blood run cold. Edward was putting his plan into action, using Vincent's depression as evidence of mental incapacity. "Mrs. Evans, I need to ask you something. Do you know any trustworthy attorneys? Someone who has no connection to the Allister family?" "Yes, I do. Mr. Henderson, who handled my late husband's estate. An honest man. Why?" Laura looked at Helena, who slept peacefully in her arms. "Because I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I need to find a way to fix things." In the following days, Laura began to act. Whenever she went out with Helena for medical appointments or supervised outings, she made small detours. First, she went to Mr. Henderson's office, a 60-year-old man with kind eyes and an impeccable reputation in family law. "Ms. Morrison," he said after hearing her story, "your situation is more complex than it seems. Legally, Mr. Sterling has rights as the biological father, but the fact that you were coerced into returning can be challenged." "I wasn't technically coerced," Laura admitted. "I chose to return to protect Vincent." "Ah, but there's the rub," Mr. Henderson leaned forward. If we can prove that this choice was the result of blackmail and manipulation, we have grounds for a lawsuit. But we need evidence. Laura thought of the paintings Edward had used against her, the way the whole situation had been orchestrated. What if I can get a confession on tape? Mr. Henderson studied her carefully. That would be dangerous, and depending on how it was obtained, it might not be admissible in court. But it would be a start, Laura insisted. Her next stop was a small cafe downtown, where she met Marissa Jenkins, an investigative journalist she had known years ago at an art exhibition. Marissa was known for her reports on political corruption and abuse of power. "Laura Morrison," Marissa said, hugging her friend, "you vanished off the radar. There are rumors you're involved with Representative Sterling." "It's a long story," Laura said, looking around nervously, "and I need your help." Laura told Marissa everything, about Vincent, about Edward's blackmail, about how she'd been manipulated into returning to Robert. Marissa listened with the professional attention of someone accustomed to dealing with political scandals. "This is big, Laura," Marissa finally said. "Representative using influence to pressure ex-partner, wealthy family manipulating situations for personal gain. But I need solid proof." "What exactly do you need?" "Recordings, documents, witnesses, something that proves you were coerced, that this whole happy relationship story is a farce." Laura spent the next few days planning carefully. Vincent looked at his brother with an expression Edward had never seen before. Pure, absolute contempt. "Get off my property," Vincent said, his voice dangerously low. "Now, Vincent, be rational. Get out!" The shout echoed through the mountains, startling birds from the trees. Edward recoiled, finally realizing he had gone too far. When Vincent was finally alone, he walked to the caretaker's cottage. The door was ajar, and inside were signs of Laura's hurried departure. Open drawers, a few forgotten clothes, the easel still set up with a half-finished painting. It was a portrait of him smiling, something she had painted from memory, because Vincent couldn't remember genuinely smiling in years. But in Laura's delicate strokes, he saw the man he had become by her and Helena's side, a man capable of loving again, of being happy, of having hope. Now, looking at the empty cottage, Vincent realized he had lost more than the woman he loved. He had lost the version of himself Laura had helped him rekindle. And for the second time in his life, he was completely alone, with only his choices and regrets as company. 2 weeks had passed since Laura had returned to New York City with Robert, and life in the luxurious penthouse in an upscale Manhattan neighborhood seemed like a gilded dream that had quickly turned into a nightmare. Robert had fulfilled his material promises: an elegant apartment, a nanny for Helena, expensive clothes, everything money could buy. But Laura discovered that being a discreet partner meant living like a gilded prisoner. She couldn't go out alone without reporting where she was going and with whom. Her social media accounts had been gently deactivated by Robert's PR team. When she tried to sell some paintings at a local gallery, she received a polite but firm call explaining that it would be better for everyone if she focused solely on motherhood for now. "It's temporary," Robert would always say whenever she protested. "Until things calm down in the press, you understand." But Laura was starting to understand too much. Like the fact that Robert had security cameras in every room except Helena's bedroom. How he knew exactly whom she had spoken to during the day, even when she only went out to take Helena to the pediatrician. How her freedom had been exchanged for a golden cage. What haunted her most, however, were the nights. Robert expected her to play the role of partner in every aspect, but Laura felt dead inside. When he touched her, she would close her eyes and think of Vincent, of his gentle hands holding Helena, the way his eyes lit up when she entered the room, the way he whispered her name as if it were a prayer. It was on one of those nights, while breastfeeding Helena at 3 a.m, that Laura made a decision. She picked up the new cell phone Robert had given her, surely monitored, and called the only number she had memorized, Mrs. Evans. "Hello?" The familiar voice answered after many rings. "Mrs. Evans, it's me, Laura," she whispered, looking at the door to make sure Robert was sleeping. "My dear, how are you? And little Helena?" We're fine," Laura lied. "How is Vincent?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "He's not well, dear. Not well at all. He barely leaves his office, doesn't eat right, fired all the staff except me. It's like he's gone back to those first years after Isabella died, only worse." Laura closed her eyes, feeling guilt clench her chest. "And Edward?" "That scoundrel." Mrs. Evans' voice was laced with anger. "He vanished into thin air after Vincent threw him out. But yesterday he showed up here with some men in suits, saying he had the right to inspect the property." Inspect? "He said he was concerned about Vincent's mental competency, that a man who fires staff and isolates himself like that might not be fit to manage the family businesses." Laura felt her blood run cold. Edward was putting his plan into action, using Vincent's depression as evidence of mental incapacity. "Mrs. Evans, I need to ask you something. Do you know any trustworthy attorneys? Someone who has no connection to the Allister family?" "Yes, I do. Mr. Henderson, who handled my late husband's estate. An honest man." "Why?" Laura looked at Helena, who slept peacefully in her arms. "Because I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I need to find a way to fix things." In the following days, Laura began to act. Whenever she went out with Helena for medical appointments or supervised outings, she made small detours. First, she went to Mr. Henderson's office, a 60-year-old man with kind eyes and an impeccable reputation in family law. "Ms. Morrison," he said after hearing her story, "your situation is more complex than it seems. Legally, Mr. Sterling has rights as the biological father, but the fact that you were coerced into returning can be challenged." "I wasn't technically coerced," Laura admitted. "I chose to return to protect Vincent." "Ah, but there's the rub." Mr. Henderson leaned forward. "If we can prove that this choice was the result of blackmail and manipulation, we have grounds for a lawsuit. But we need evidence." Laura thought of the paintings Edward had used against her, the way the whole situation had been orchestrated. "What if I can get a confession on tape?" Mr. Henderson studied her carefully. "That would be dangerous, and depending on how it was obtained, it might not be admissible in court." "But it would be a start," Laura insisted. Her next stop was a small cafe downtown where she met Marissa Jenkins, an investigative journalist she had known years ago at an art exhibition. Marissa was known for her reports on political corruption and abuse of power. "Laura Morrison," Marissa said, hugging her friend, "you vanished off the radar. There are rumors you're involved with Representative Sterling." "It's a long story," Laura said, looking around nervously, "and I need your help." Laura told Marissa everything, about Vincent, about Edward's blackmail, about how she'd been manipulated into returning to Robert. Marissa listened with the professional attention of someone accustomed to dealing with political scandals. "This is big, Laura," Marissa finally said. "Representative using influence to pressure ex-partner, wealthy family manipulating situations for personal gain. But I need solid proof." "What exactly do you need?" "Recordings, documents, witnesses, something that proves you were coerced, that this whole happy relationship story is a farce." Laura spent the next few days planning carefully. She began recording conversations with Robert, always with her cell phone hidden, capturing moments when he made it clear that their relationship was a political convenience. She managed to photograph documents she found in his office, including correspondence with Edward Allister that suggested coordination between them. But the most shocking discovery came by chance. Laura was organizing Helena's things when she found an envelope she had forgotten in the diaper bag, something she had grabbed from the caretaker's cottage in the rush to leave. Inside was a letter Vincent had written to her, but never delivered. Laura, the letter read, I know it's too soon to talk about love, but I can no longer pretend that you and Helena are just temporary guests in my life. You brought light to a place that has been dead for 5 years. I don't know if I deserve a second chance at happiness, but I know I want to try to build something real with you. I know you're afraid of my past, of my baggage, but perhaps we can heal the wounds we carry together. Laura had to stop reading, tears blurring her vision. Vincent had written that before the whole catastrophe, when there was still hope for them, and she had thrown everything away out of fear, allowing others to decide her fate. That night, when Robert returned from a session in Congress, Laura was waiting for him in the living room, with Helena sleeping in her bassinet nearby. We need to talk, she said. Robert studied her with calculating eyes. About what? About when this farce is going to end. About when you're going to set me free. Robert laughed, but it wasn't a cheerful sound. Free? Laura, don't you understand yet? There is no free for you. Not after everything we've invested in this situation. Invested? Do you think it was easy to clean up the mess you made back in the mountains? Do you think it didn't cost money to make those photos disappear from the internet? To ensure no investigative journalist looked into your romantic getaway? Laura felt her heart pound. What photos? Oh, you didn't know? Robert smiled cruelly. Your friend Edward wasn't very discreet. Some of the images he used to bring you back ended up leaking to gossip blogs. Reclusive millionaire and mysterious mistress. It was a PR nightmare. Laura realized she had been manipulated even more than she imagined. Edward hadn't just blackmailed her. He had ensured the story became public enough to destroy any chance of her returning to Vincent without causing a larger scandal. But as Robert continued speaking, detailing how he had resolved the situation, Laura discreetly activated her phone's recorder. Every word was another confession. Every detail further proof that the entire situation had been orchestrated. When she finally went to her room, Laura knew she had enough material to start the fight. She called Mr. Henderson and scheduled a meeting for the next day, then sent an encrypted message to Marissa with part of the recordings. Looking at Helena sleeping peacefully, Laura made a silent promise. She had allowed fear to control her once, had let others decide her fate. But no more. It was time to fight for the love she had lost, for the life she truly wanted, for the happiness that Vincent and she deserved to have together. The war was just beginning, but for the first time in weeks, Laura felt a spark of hope. Vincent had said he loved her, and she was finally ready to fight for that love. The final confrontation happened in a way Laura had never imagined. 3 weeks after starting to gather evidence, she received a desperate call from Mrs. Evans. "Laura, my dear, you need to come back," the housekeeper cried. "Vincent, he's doing very badly. Edward got a court order alleging he's not mentally competent to manage the businesses. He brought doctors, attorneys. They're going to forcibly commit Vincent." Laura felt her world spin. Forcibly commit him? He says he has severe depression, that he poses a risk to himself. The papers are already signed. They're taking him this afternoon. Laura looked at Helena, who was playing on the living room floor, oblivious to the adult drama. It was now or never. She picked up the phone and called Marissa. "I need you and your crew at the Alistair property in 2 hours," she said without preamble. "I'm going to give you the biggest story of your career." "Laura, what are you going to do?" "I'm going for the man I love." The next call was to Mr. Henderson, who agreed to accompany her with an injunction challenging the forced commitment. The third was to Robert. "I'm taking Helena for a doctor's appointment," she lied. "The nanny can take her," Robert said, suspicious. "It's a specific appointment. I need to speak with the doctor myself." 2 hours later, Laura was on the road to the North Carolina mountains, with Helena in the back seat and her heart pounding like a drum. Behind her followed 2 cars, one with Marissa and her team, the other with Mr. Henderson and a court officer. When they arrived at the estate, the scene was straight out of a horror movie. 2 ambulances were parked in front of the main mansion, along with several official vehicles. Edward commanded the operation like a general, pointing directions to the paramedics who were preparing to enter the house. Laura got out of the car with Helena in her arms and walked directly to Edward, who paled at the sight of her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. "Stopping you from completely destroying your brother's life," Laura replied, loud enough for Marissa's cameras to capture everything. "You have no legal authority here," Edward said, but his voice trembled. "Actually, I do," Mr. Henderson interjected, approaching with the papers. "An injunction challenging the commitment based on evidence that this entire process was motivated by financial interests, not legitimate medical concern." Edward tried to back away, but Marissa approached with her microphone. "Mr. Edward Alastair, is it true that you orchestrated a scheme to separate Ms. Laura Morrison from your brother, including coordination with Representative Robert Sterling?" "I have no comment," Edward said, but the panic in his eyes was visible. It was at that moment that Vincent appeared at the mansion's door. Laura barely recognized him. He was thin, bearded, with hollow eyes that spoke of weeks of insomnia and despair. When he saw her, he froze as if he'd seen a ghost. "Laura," he whispered, as if he feared it was a hallucination. She ran to him, Helena still in her arms, and for the first time in weeks, she felt whole. Vincent wrapped his arms around them, pulling them close to his chest as if he would never let them go. "I thought I'd lost you forever," he murmured against her hair. "Never," Laura said, tears flowing freely. "I love you, Vincent. It took me a while to understand, but I love you." Edward tried to approach, but Mr. Henderson stopped him. "Mr. Alastair, I have recordings here that prove your participation in a scheme of blackmail and manipulation. I recommend you call your attorney." Marissa continued filming as she played parts of the recordings Laura had made. Robert's voice echoed clearly. "Do you think it was easy to clean up the mess you made back in the mountains, to ensure no investigative journalist looked into your romantic getaway?" "These recordings were obtained illegally," Edward protested. "Actually," Laura said, pulling a paper from her purse, "I had authorization. You see, Robert made me sign a bunch of documents when I came back. Among them, without me realizing it at the time, was an authorization to record conversations for purposes of relationship documentation. He wanted to protect himself, but he ended up giving me the tool I needed." Edward's expression shifted from panic to despair as he realized his plan had completely unraveled. The paramedics, without clear orders and in the face of the court injunction, began to retreat. Vincent held Laura's face in his hands. "How did you do it? How did you find everything out?" "Mrs. Evans told me about the attempted commitment, and I discovered that I can't live without you," Laura said. "That I don't want Helena to grow up thinking that love means giving up your own happiness." "And Robert?" Laura smiled for the first time in weeks. "Robert will have to explain to the State Ethics Committee why he used political influence to blackmail an ex-partner, and to his wife why he spent public money trying to suppress personal scandals." 6 months later, Laura was on the porch of the caretaker's cottage, now completely renovated and expanded, painting while Helena crawled on the lawn. Vincent approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist. "How's it looking?" he asked, gazing at the canvas. "It's a family portrait," Laura said, showing him the painting. It depicted Vincent, herself, and Helena in the main mansion's garden, with Mrs. Evans in the background, holding a coffee tray. "Our family." Vincent kissed her neck. "I like the sound of that. Our family." Edward had been convicted of orchestrating a fraudulent scheme and had lost all rights to the family inheritance. Robert faced impeachment proceedings and had lost both his wife and his political aspirations. The photos and recordings they had used against Laura turned against them when exposed by Marissa's report. "Are you sure you want to marry me?" Vincent asked, playing with the engagement ring he had given her the week before. A woman with a scandalous past, a single mother, a rebellious artist. Laura laughed, turning in his arms. I'm sure I want to marry a reclusive widower, a vineyard owner who collects sorrows and has a smile that can light up entire mountains. They kissed while Helena clapped her hands, as if approving the scene. Mrs. Evans appeared at the door, smiling. Lunch is ready, she announced, and there's a delivery for Ms. Morrison. A New York City gallery wants to exhibit your paintings. Laura looked at Vincent, who smiled with pride. Go for it, he said. Helena and I will be here when you get back, always. As they walked hand in hand toward the main mansion, Laura thought about how life could change unexpectedly. She had arrived in those mountains, fleeing a painful past, but found a future she had never dared to dream of. Vincent suddenly stopped, looking at her with that intensity that made her feel like the most loved woman in the world. What is it? Laura asked. I'm just thinking that maybe Isabella was right, he said. Maybe I really am transparent to those who truly love me. Laura gently touched his face. And what are you thinking now? Vincent smiled, the smile she had learned to awaken and planned to keep awakening for the rest of her life. I'm thinking that the storm that brought you here was the best thing that ever happened to me, and that some refugees turn into homes when we find the right people to share them with. As they entered the mansion, Helena in Vincent's arms and Laura by his side, the sun set over the North Carolina vineyards, painting the sky with golden hues that promised an even more beautiful tomorrow. The mountain refuge had become exactly what it was meant to be, a home blessed by true love, where two wounded souls found healing in each other, and where little Helena would grow up knowing that love is worth any fight.